Hello. I'm making this video to discuss some passages from the first act of Lord Byron's Manfred that I think really bring forward the character of the Byronic hero, which is a character type that I find interesting and engaging in a lot of ways, and I don't think is really represented in a lot of modern media. There are many characters who come very close to the mark of being one, but I think ultimately aren't quite. The closest pop culture example that I can think of, at least I hope this is pop culture. I'm not really connected that much to pop culture. I'm not ancient by any means, or completely ignorant, but with popular culture, I think if you're 10 years behind, you're practically a geriatric. All I know is that this character and the show he's in were on Adult Swim when I was younger, so I hope that gives it some popular exposure. And the character is Lelouch Lamperouge from the show Code Geass, which is sort of this alternate history science fiction where the Americas are the Holy Britannian Empire, and Lelouch, the main character, is the exiled son of the current emperor, Charles Lee Britannia. There's some interesting references to American history and also the aesthetic of that ancient regime European nobility that I find really charming. Obviously, the real history of that period and that group of people is very complicated, but I like the that flavor of name and style. And a lot of the characters, I think, amusingly, don't have actually European names, but like I say, that flavor of name, like Lelouch, I'm sure is meant to sound French, but I'm pretty certain it's not a real French name. One of his brothers is named Schneisel. I find that very charming. Anyway, Lelouch is, I think, a fair representation of the Byronic hero because he is aristocratic and searingly intelligent, and against his society. Though he is the potential heir of this great empire, he has actually devoted himself to its destruction by secretly aiding these anti-state actors, and doing so in the most flamboyant and gothic way possible, donning a mask and a costume. It's very Lamont Cranston, very Don Diego de la Vega. That's Zorro. If you're not familiar, that's another character I think is I almost chose because he's also very self-possessed and individualistic and against his society, which is the theme of the Byronic hero, I think. But I think he's a little bit too amiable, a little too jovial a person, whereas the Byronic type, I think, requires more of a brooding melancholy that Lelouch certainly has. And also Lelouch has the sort of self-destructive self-importance that Lord Byron's heroes tend to have, and also the selfish motivations, even though he has taken on this revolutionary activity in opposing his own country and trying to dismantle its institutions. He does so for largely selfish reasons, almost Freudian reasons. He hates the empire because he hates his father. And that complicated relationship with the family, I think, is also very Byronic. And he uses such soaring, self-aggrandizing language. He states his goal is to destroy the world and create it. So that gives you an idea of the traits I think the Byronic hero needs to have to be considered as such. Which brings me back to the poem or the play itself, Manfred, whereof the main character demonstrates all of these traits. Firstly, I wanted to note that the title itself, Manfred, immediately makes me think of the Castle of Otranto. I'm not sure that Byron had that in mind, though I'm certain he must have been familiar with the novel by Horace Walpole. And the character Manfred in that, the evil father whose schemes and secret sin propels the plot of that book, probably would have resonated with him, I think. And the name is not so exotic that it's inevitably a reference, but when I think of Manfred in literature, that name, that's where my mind goes. And this first passage that I want to read, it's fairly short. It's from Scene 1, lines 41 to 49, where Byron's Manfred is attempting to summon the elemental powers of the sky, the sea, the air, the mountains, and so forth, trying to bend them to his will. As I'll read for you. Spirits of earth and air, ye shall not thus elude me, by a power deeper than all yet urged, a tyrant spell, which had its birthplace in a star condemned, the burning wreck of a demolished world, a wandering hell in the eternal space. By the strong curse which is upon my soul, the thought which is within me and around me, I do compel ye to my will, appear. So this is very strong language to be using toward what I think are fair to call gods, these personified forces of nature or the world. And what it immediately reminds me of is Achilles in the Iliad. And I'm often connecting things to the Greek stories and epics because those are stories and poems that are very dear to me personally, but I think is apt here because Lord Byron was certainly also familiar with all of that material. And the Greek hero, to me, is sort of a proto-Byronic type. All of them are self-absorbed in ways I think that grate on a lot of modern sensibilities. They're not against their societies in the same way as the Byronic hero, but they are called by their heroic fate to transgress their societies in most cases, and even in many to oppose the gods themselves, although they are intimately tied to the gods, many of them having a divine heritage. All of them are aristocratic. But none is more Byronic, I think, than Achilles, as we can see from his behavior in the Iliad. And there are passages quite like this one in the Iliad, where Achilles is commanding the forces of nature, or speaking to the gods themselves as almost unequal, or we might even read as a superior, someone who has the right to demand their attention and respect. I've actually been reading recently an interesting monograph on the subject of prayer and address to the gods in ancient Greek religion and how that's reflected in the literature. And it's a very complicated and nuanced subject, but suffice to say, Achilles is speaking to the gods in a godlike way, which I think is reflected in Manfred here. And Achilles also has the same self-important and self-destructive personality, which I think is very important. And again, I'm sure that Byron was familiar with all of this material. I mean, I'm almost certain that he read the Greek original, but definitely there were translations that he would have been well acquainted with. And this very well might have been in his mind as he was writing this passage. There are a lot of other things I could connect with in that, but I'll try to move on. let's see, the other passage that I think follows well from that one is in Scene 2, it's lines 26 to 36. For I have ceased to justify my deeds unto myself, the last infirmity of evil, aye. Thou winged and excuse me. Aye, thou winged and cloud-cleaving minister whose happy flight is highest unto heaven. Well mayest thou swoop so near to me, I should be thy prey and gorge thine eaglets. Thou art gone, where the eye cannot follow thee, but thine yet pierces downward, onward, or above with a pervading vision. Beautiful, how beautiful is all this visible world. First of all, I think those lines are just lovely, which goes for a lot of Byron's poetry, I'll say, in my opinion at least. But also it gets at what I think is part of the attraction of the truly Byronic character, is that despite their self-importance and self-absorption, there is a reaching outward toward something beyond themselves. They push the limits of their society and their own mortality, because, at least in part, they're seeking something better, something more cosmic, more wonderful. To paraphrase, I think something Harold Bloom said of Hamlet, they're a psychology at war with its own limitations, which is attractive, I think, because it's very human. And I think that is certainly what a lot of the modern characters who are close to being Byronic heroes are missing, is this constantly seeking and yearning quality, and this cosmic perspective. But I think that's also the flaw, or the tragic flaw of the Byronic hero, is that they can't reach the cosmos that they're looking toward. It's their Achilles heel, or their Byronic foot, if you'd like. Because they're so self-indulgent and self-obsessed, they're constantly getting in their own way. They're not capable of experiencing the emptying of the self that is necessary for, I'll just use the word communion with that beyond. And that's what is tragic about them. And that leads pretty well to some of my personal feelings or thoughts about Lord Byron, his work, as well as his character. I have a lot of mixed feelings about him. I really enjoyed his work when I was younger, like 15, 16, which I think is the right age to like him. I was also listening to a lot of Led Zeppelin at that time, which I think makes sense. I mean, Woman, thy vows are written on the sand just sounds like a Zeppelin lyric. I can hear that in Robert Plant's voice. You could squeeze it into Dazed and Confused. Anyway, because Byron, I have a lot of the same feelings about him as I have toward John Donne, where taken solely for their aesthetic quality, much of the verse is simply gorgeous, and to me that's inescapable. But then you get to the bit where they're just ranting about how they hate women, and it's like, maybe you could trim those lines. So anyway, it's certainly a complicated affection, but I do find his work aesthetically pleasing at the very least, and his personal character very interesting. Obviously, I wouldn't want to meet him, but I would, I think, really enjoy a historical novel in which Byron was a character. I think it would be difficult to pull off, but I would admire the attempt. Perhaps someone out there knows a book they can recommend to me. In any case, I I hope I've not missed anything. I had some notes to keep me on track, but I'm sure I've been very long-winded and rambly as I tend to get when I talk about literature, so I'll try to wrap things up here. The sun is out, and that's my signal to go, so thank you. Oh, actually, a quick note. I'm currently only able to record from my phone, as may or may not be obvious. We'll see. I am not the most technologically proficient, so I'm still figuring out how this is going to work. Whether I'm going to be able to marry this audio to some other video or something without the use of an expensive editing software, and if not, I hope you enjoy this early morning footage of my house and my dog, whose name is Wilfred. All right, thank you.